Some stories are so dark they're almost impossible to wrap your head around. A single horrific night of violence that began in public and ended in the deepest privacy of a family home. On one side that night, a woman was shot outside a sports bar. On the other, a mother went home, killed her two young children, and then took her own life. The case of Andrea Davis forces us to ask an incredible hard question. How does a crisis escalate so fast? From a public fight to what investigators call a family annihilation. What pushes a person to this point? We're going to examine the timeline of that tragic night, explore the psychological concepts that might shed some light on such an extreme act, and confront the difficult question these events raise about the systems we all rely on.
Blood on the grass won't wash away undetected footprints.
The night of May 25th, 2020 started out like any other at Tailgater Sports Bar and Grill in Glendale, Arizona. But just after midnight, that normalcy was shattered by gunfire. Police rushed to the scene after a frantic 911 call from a man named Nolan Davis, who was 39. He reported that his wife, 38-year-old Andrea Davis, had shown up at the bar, confronted him, and started shooting. Nolan was with another woman. While he wasn't hurt in the attack, the 36-year-old woman with him was hit in the back of the head as she tried to get away. Miraculously, her injuries weren't life-threatening. By the time police arrived, Andrea had already fled in a gray SUV. To the outside world, this looked like a contained, though shocking incident, a domestic dispute that had dangerously spilled into public. An investigation into that shooting was launched immediately, but what nobody knew was that this wasn't the end of the night's violence. It wasn't even close. The crisis was about to turn inward, escalate from a public crime to a private catastrophe that would swallow an entire family. What happens in the moment after an act of public violence? For Andrea Davis, the short drive from the Glendale Sports Bar to her family home, just 2 miles away, near Bell Road and 51st Avenue in Northwest Phoenix, was a journey into a much deeper darkness. While police were still processing the first crime scene, Andrea's rage and desperation began to spiral. It was during this time that her husband Nolan Davis began receiving text messages from her. One of them contained an explicit, horrifying warning. She was going to harm their children. The threat soon became terrifyingly real when Andrea sent her husband a photo showing one of their children with an injury, bleeding from the head. And that's when the nature of the threat twisted into something truly monstrous. The violence was no longer a conflict between adults. It was now an unimaginable threat against the most vulnerable. Glendale police, now realizing the dire situation, immediately alerted the Phoenix Police Department, who raced to the family's home. But they were already behind a tragedy that was unfolding with terrifying speed. Those unseen moments, the drive home, the composition of those awful messages, hold the key to a mind in a complete collapse. When Phoenix police officers get to the Davis family home, they knew the situation was critical. After getting the alert from Glendale PD, including the horrifying photographic evidence, they had no choice but to force their way inside. What they found was a scene that a police spokesperson would later call a horrific situation. Inside the house, the violence that began in a bar parking lot had reached its awful conclusion. Officers found the bodies of 38-year-old Andrea Davis, her 10-year-old son, and her 18-month-old daughter. It appeared that Andrea had shot both of her children before turning the gun on herself. A friend of Andrea's, Amy Bowers, told local news that the couple had been together for 12 years and that Andrea had been deeply stressed about their marital problems. She recalled Andrea worrying, "What am I supposed to do with the kids?" Nolan's cousin, Felicia Queen, tried to make sense of the unthinkable, telling reporters, "They were little, they didn't deserve it." She then added something that gets to the heart of the confusion in these cases. "He's a very good dad, and she was a good mom. She did what she did, but she wasn't a horrible person." The sentiment that a person can be both a loving parent and a killer is the paradox at the center of this tragedy. The details here are incredibly tough to get through, and they have left us searching for answers. If you believe it's important to understand the complex issues behind these tragedies, please consider subscribing to the channel and liking this video. It allows me to continue creating content that tries to make sense of the unthinkable. Now, let's look at the psychology that might help explain what happened. With no history of domestic violence caused to the home, police and family were left trying to understand what could lead to such an extreme act. To even begin to unpack the why, we can look at patterns identified by criminologists and psychologists. The act of a parent killing their child is called familicide. When it involves destroying the entire family, including the killer's own life, it's often called family annihilation. While these acts are most often committed by men, women can be perpetrators too. In his foundational research, Dr. Philip Resnick identified 5 main motives for filicide. First, altruistic filicide. The parent believes they are saving the child from a fate worse than death, often linked to the parent's own taking themselves out. Acute psychotic filicide. The parent is suffering from a severe mental illness and kills without a rational motive. Unwanted child filicide. The parent sees the child as a block to their own life or desires. Fatal maltreatment filicide. The death is the unintentional result of ongoing abuse. Spouse revenge filicide. The classic Medea complex where a parent kills their children to inflict the ultimate suffering on a partner, often after infidelity or abandonment. Look at the timeline of the Andrea Davis case. Many experts would likely point towards one particular motive: spousal revenge. The violence was triggered by a confrontation with her husband and another woman. The text messages that followed and the final horrific act against the children served as the most extreme way imaginable to punish her husband, transforming the children into instruments of that revenge. Criminologists have also noted that some family annihilators have a self-righteous profile, holding their spouse entirely responsible for the family's collapse. In their mind, the ultimate act of violence is a way to assign blame. The rapid escalation from a public shooting to a private murder, take yourself out, seems to fit this pattern. A final, desperate attempt to assert control and inflict pain when a relationship ends. Beyond the psychology of one person, a tragedy like this forces us to look in the mirror and ask hard questions about the system meant to protect us. When a crisis spirals this quickly, were there any chances for intervention that were missed? This case highlights a devastating intersection of domestic turmoil and a mental health crisis. Just because there were no prior police calls doesn't mean the family wasn't in crisis. Many periods of intense mental distress and marital conflict go unreported. Friends described a marriage that had been struggling for about a year, pointing to a silent buildup of pressure that finally and violently exploded. Our systems are often reactive, not proactive. Support arrives after a 911 call, after violence has already erupted. But what about before? There's often a lack of accessible, low-barrier mental health resources for people in crisis. The stigma around marital problems and mental health can stop people from seeking help until it's far too late. In this instance, Glendale and Phoenix police did act quickly to share information. However, the sheer speed of the event, unfolding over just a couple of hours, shows how difficult it is for any system to stop a rapid, private escalation. This case is a tragic reminder that family violence isn't always a history of police reports. Sometimes it's a complex web of control and mental anguish and desperation that leads to the most unthinkable outcome. The case of Andrea Davis is a story of utter devastation. In just a few short hours, a dispute at a bar spiraled into a murder and take myself out that left a father without his family and 2 children robbed of their futures. There is no simple answers to why. What we see is a tragic collision of factors. A marriage breaking down, overwhelming jealousy and rage, and a catastrophic psychological collapse that turned a mother into a killer. It's easy to label Andrea's actions as the work of a monster, but it's far more difficult and far more important to understand the patterns that plague the motive of spousal revenge, the rapid escalation, and the finality of the murder and take myself out are all horrifyingly familiar elements in the study of these tragedies. The story of Andrea Davis and her children is more than just a true crime case. It's a profound human tragedy that serves as a brutal warning. It highlights the desperate need for better mental health support, for more conversations about domestic strife, and for a system that tries to prevent violence before it consumes another family. And it leaves us with the haunting reality that sometimes the systems designed to protect us are simply no match for a heart bent on annihilation.
Blood on the grass won't wash away. Undetected